there's a lot of fear about this rapprochement that is happening between China and India. And of course, Russia, where you are, it's one of the most important members of the multipolar world, BRICS, etc. All three of these countries are getting closer together, and foreign policy, of course, and an arch neocon rag is sounding the alarm why they shouldn't India fall into the Russia-China trap. But here's the reality that these people live in. Just look at this. Russia and China cannot provide what India needs for long-term development and security. While it's been diversifying away from Russian weapons, it needs modern supplies. Moscow is useful for cheap energy, but offers little in advanced technology and investment. China is viewed with deep suspicion, and who rightly consider it primary to be suspicious for long-term Indian interests. To manage its China, it needs friends elsewhere. So this is the kind of arguments that are coming out of the neocons. Chay, what's your assessment of this overall global picture, especially Russia's role in it, as this multipolar world gets closer and closer due to the policies of both Trump and NATO? Well,
look, over the last few years, BRICS, I've been at several of the conferences. I've been at the foreign ministers' conferences. I've been in Kazan. I've visited them. I've interviewed. It's a very colorful, very positive feeling. But of course, what's happened now, the catalyst for BRICS to actually, BRICS was kind of an idea. It was an idea, probably, if you were skeptical about it, you would say that BRICS was created because it was like a poor man's Porsche. It was like the idea that we're not in the big club, so we'll create another club because we've been isolated. But what's happened with BRICS, and I interviewed Paul Mashatile, the South African Deputy Prime Minister in St. Petersburg at the St. Petersburg conference this year, which was huge, by the way. And we talked about this. And he said there's a real sense within the BRICS countries now that the invitations went out for BRICS, and the idea was we were going to do this, we were going to do that. And there was kind of a sense that it was kind of, you were having a big dinner party and you were going to serve some Pringles and dip when people actually arrived. You know, there was a bit of a sense that BRICS was like a good idea, that we would cooperate, but no one really understood how it would happen. And what's happened now is the conflict in Ukraine has been this catalyst, and it's demonstrated the value of these relationships and the pre-signed agreements. For example, Iran having a home, if you like, in BRICS, when it was struck by the United States in this sort of unilateral idea that it was attacked by Israel and the United States. It already had channels open inside the BRICS countries. Remember, this is one that was, before Russia, the most sanctioned country on earth. Also, the foremost developer of drone and missile technology on earth as well, while under sanctions. And there's a continuity there between Russia, now the most sanctioned country on earth, which managed to produce the Oreshnik missile, which NATO and the United States and anyone on earth can even see where it is before it would strike their country. So the idea that sanctions was going to bully people into submission and into compliance with this global hegemony is so ludicrous and foolish and foolhardy, is now been proven by the fact that BRICS seems to be on the cusp of something much greater. I'm hearing things that real alliances could be forged, not just geostrategic ones, energy ones, because it's essentially BRICS was a sort of cooperation. It was like almost a model somewhat on the European Economic Community, the EEC, from the 1970s, which of course was a great idea until it became the European Union. So BRICS has learned a lot from that. But when you see what's happened to Iran, you see what's happened to Russia and what's happening with China, particularly over Taiwan, and this idea that the one China policy, which is accepted on paper, but very cynically, weapons are supplied and agitation politically against China as some sort of authoritarian regime. On the other hand, these great powers, which they are regionally great powers, and if you don't ever leave the United States or Washington and you work for a completely delusional magic book like Foreign Policy or one of these journals, you never have to. And you never are going to get sacked for writing the most delusional drivel in history from one of these journals. I've never seen a single piece of accountable journalism from any of these people who say, Russia will defeat them in 3 weeks. Vladimir Putin is in a diabetic coma, and the Russians have 4 missiles left. Things like that were published, remember, 3 years ago. And here we are with the same people who published it saying, we have to stop them. A friend of mine called Brian MacDonald, an Irish journalist based here, back in 2015, he coined the term Russophrenia. And this term means you believe Russia is in imminent collapse. The whole society in Russia here is collapsing. You're likely to be pushed out a window. You're going to be sent to the gulag. But also Russia's going to take over the world. How do you do that? How does Russia manage to threaten the whole global order and also be in perpetual collapse? And that defines the delusional foreign policy think tank fantasy, how that informs policy from people who, frankly, without being insulting, people like Donald Trump, who lives in a palatial golf course, remember. This is a man who was brought up in a military school, an elite military school, far away from civilization, and then started his business empire with a small loan from his father of $1 million. Don't forget who we're dealing with, who is forging policy. And also, it's almost like in the court of the Orange Tsar now. There's a great book, The Court of the Red Tsar, where Stalin may look at you in a certain way, and that was either you were about to be promoted or something else was about to happen to you. I see the same dynamic in Trump's Oval Office. And in my show I do a show Moscow Mules. This week we've looked at that, and we've put together this compilation of everybody, like almost you have to reverse backwards into the room like a medieval vassal to say, don't upset him, whatever you do. And that doesn't contribute to proactive and incisive foreign policy. It doesn't. It contributes to a pseudo-religious compliance with an ego which wants to solve wars, even despite the fact they haven't been solved. So you got to understand, BRICS sees that. There's very smart people in Tehran, very smart people in New Delhi, very smart people in Moscow. In my view, if I'm playing chess, I know what side of the chessboard I want to be on. And it goes without saying. Biggest manufacturing economy on earth, biggest democracy on earth, biggest energy supplier on earth. And these are growing economies. While on the other side of the table, you've got Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, Donald Trump, and Mr. Navarro, who at the end of his statement today saying that they were going to punish India, he said, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Can you imagine? So I hope that answers your question.
I just want to add to it. Maybe see if Chay agrees with me or not. The threat of secondary sanctions against anybody trading with Russia and then going after India on that basis. I think Donald Trump deserves an award from BRICS. I mean, because that move is a master move for BRICS. Donald Trump has done more, and Peter Navarro have done more for BRICS than anybody. They should be given the Medal of Freedom. What do you think, Chay? BRICS Medal of Freedom.
It's obvious. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, you know, why on earth would these burgeoning powers here, who have friends and who are not isolated, why on earth would they? I wrote recently that if India buckles and bends the knee to this economic pressure from the United States, they essentially accept that they are no longer sovereign. Because maybe back in the post-war period when the United States created its hegemony with the implementation of the dollar, a debt-based currency in Africa. They did it in Europe. The Marshall Plan wasn't really all about just rebuilding Europe. It was about cultivating reliance on a dollar, a global currency system, which is debt-based. And, you know, the United States doesn't need to invade your country necessarily. It can just tell you, you know, we're going to call in your loans or we're going to, you know, put you under economic pressure. You can't do that with India. You can't do that. They haven't been able to do it with Russia. Remember, the United States has implemented over 13,000 sanctions against Russia. And 10 days ago, the American president shook the hand of the same man he was sanctioning. It's a ludicrous situation. Of course, what they should be doing, as Jeffrey Sachs, very learned man, much smarter than me, has said to us, of course they should be bridging this gap with, you know, becoming part of a unipolar world. Nobody has a problem with the dollar as a global reserve currency. It's the dollar that has the problem with the rest of the world. It's not the other way around. And Vladimir Putin has said that many times. We don't have a problem with the dollar or trading with the United States. It's the United States that is trying to weaponize a good idea against us, and they're not going to tolerate it. So I think if BRICS, and if a multipolar world, a much used phrase, I tire of it a bit because it's much maligned and much misused. If it is to happen, I think we're in the crucible, this furnace of this pressure that's been created now. I don't see Modi, Xi, and Putin looking at each other. And this meeting is going to happen in September 3rd, a few days from now, where China, by the way, is going to showcase its vast military investment and development as well. I don't see these men looking across the table and saying, I'm terrified. How do you feel? We should probably surrender. Who wants to walk out first with the white flag? I don't see these men doing that. And if you recall, when President Xi visited Moscow, I was there. I was at the Kremlin. I saw President Xi leaving the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin and him greeting each other. And we heard them say, we're on the cusp of history. We're going to define this coming era for our peoples and for each other. They said that to each other then. And I don't think that was an insincere statement. And now the Americans and the Europeans, who are less significant, the Americans, in a very clumsy way, have completely opened up this mold for China, India, and Russia to pour this mold in to make BRICS something far more tangible and powerful than it was when it was just an idea.
Yeah, it could, at the end of the day, the G7, any of these, global organizations, multilateral organizations, they're all based on trust. Even the WTO, it's all based on trust. Every treaty is based on trust. So when the BRICS countries come together, what the power of BRICS, like any of these organizations, is that there's this implicit trust that you're going to basically come good on whatever commitments that you're making with your partners on that. So that we're going to do this for you and it's going to be in 10 years. Okay, we sign, you can take that to the bank. That this is all broken down with the United States. As Lavrov famously said, they're no longer agreement capable. That's the end. That's the whole, being able to be agreement capable, at least pretending to care with your allies, at least pretending, is the basis of U.S. hegemony, because the U.S. can't be the global hegemon without partners, without people helping. And so now they're losing their parts. They're threatening their allies with secondary sanctions. They're threatening everybody with tariffs, punitive tariffs. I mean, totally insane. So that's really, I mean, Donald Trump's kind of accelerating the demise of the United States as a global hegemon. But the real funny part of that foreign policy article that Danny showed us was whoever the Crabtree or whatever his name is saying, well, sure, Russia's good for cheap energy, but you need more than that. No, the cheap energy is the basis of your whole economy. Who would thumb their nose at cheap energy except for, Germany and Europe, and commit economic suicide? I mean, these people are like living in a whole nother world. And it's just amazing that they've got steady work writing foreign policy stuff.
And with China, it's like India has a right, with no reasoning given, has a right to be threatened by China. Meanwhile, it's the Trump administration that's slapping the 50% tariffs, and it's the Trump administration and Europe all together that are constantly looking at who to sanction next over Russia. And it's all coming to a head. I mean, there's also at China's Victory Day, you're going to see the DPRK, North Korea. You're going to see, everyone is coming from the multipolar world, and a lot of these countries don't have U.S. military bases. It's basically a convening as what a lot of neocons are calling it, the axis of upheaval. But there's also the situation in Gaza, the Ukraine conflict. There's just so many things I feel like that are tethering the United States downward. And the U.S. political class, the foreign policy blob, they're so ready and willing to go down. So, but what's your assessment of the overall situation, factoring in, not only these tariffs, but the overall position the U.S. finds itself in as this global hegemon? Well,
the overall position is, just to add to what you said quickly about India and China's reaction to Trump's threat of secondary sanctions against India was to, lift import restrictions. So all of these restrictions between China and India, they could be anti-competition restrictions, or have to do with certain, military applications, whatever. China's announced they're going to relax all that immediately. China did that intentionally. They did that intentionally to show India that don't worry, we're going to increase our trade, and we're going to come closer together. We're going to have a better relationship, and it's going to be a win-win. So, I mean, who could have delivered that but Donald Trump? But it's not what Trump intended to do. Although if you read QAnon, they'll probably say there's some 5D chess move. Trump's really trying to ramp up the multipolar world and accelerate all these good things for the multipolar world. I mean, if you believe that sort of stuff. But just generally, I think that Iran still remains the ultimate pivot between West Asia and also East Asia and the Asian subcontinent. So geopolitically speaking, for all the things that China would like to accomplish with the Belt and Road Initiative, and all of the BRICS countries would like to accomplish, Iran, and you could attach Azerbaijan to that, and any other bordering states. I think that's the key. That is the key geopolitical pivot, no doubt. And so there's a lot of energy that's going to be put into that from the U.S. side, from the Israeli side, to undermine Iran, because this brings us back to that eternal question: is with regards to Israel, does the tail wag the dog, or is Israel a beachhead for Western imperialism? And my answer has always been, it's both. It's a symbiotic relationship whereby the United States will support Israel, will allow it to exist, will allow it to pursue the Greater Israel Project, okay, provided Israel remains an asset for Anglo-American imperialism and hegemony. And when I say Anglo-American, I'm talking about the British and the Americans, because they still lead Europe. Europe just in general plays second fiddle to the Anglo-American establishment. Even though collectively Europe could, was very close to overcoming that right before COVID, with the advance in European Defense Union and things like that. But that didn't happen. And then we got the Ukraine war, and NATO, led by the U.S. and Britain, is now in the catbird seat, determining military, economic, as well as political affairs in Europe. But so Israel's allowed to do that. When Israel's becoming a liability, then I think the Anglo-American establishment has to rethink the future of Israel. So it does have a very strong hold politically and financially in the United States, over the legislature, over the political economy in America, and ditto for Europe. We're talking about thousands of organizations, Israeli lobby organizations and interest organizations that UK academic David Miller has mapped out. Just the UK, I think 3,000 organizations. At the top of that tree, a few dozen. Right. So in America, probably the same or more in terms of the numbers. So it's very entrenched, into the fabric and the biosphere of U.S. politics and also Europe. But the money, where is the capital? Where is the direct investment going? Where's the City of London in Europe investing? Where are they going to get the best return on their investment? Is it in the West or is it in the East? And of course it's in the East, because that's where the growth is. That's where the innovation is. This is where the expansion, this is where the infrastructure is being built. And this is where you have governments like China, like Russia, that have taken the state, maybe India to some degree. I'm not as familiar with the Modi's policies on state-directed economy, but I am familiar with the Chinese and the Russians, and that gives stability and predictability. Where are you going to invest? Where are you going to invest? Of course, the capital is going to automatically flow to stability and predictability, because that's where the return's going to be. So, I mean, that could, in the end, overtake the legacy of Zionism and its incredible, whip hand over U.S. foreign policy, and also European policy and European politics. European politics. The Zionist and Israeli lobby have created an alliance with the far right in Europe, and also in the United States to a degree. But if you consider Trump and MAGA to be far right, it's not the same to me. But the populist far right in Europe, Israel has made it absolute concerted effort to co-opt and build alliances on all these issues. So they're driving the conversation on, immigration, the Muslims in Europe. Elon Musk has now been co-opted into this effort as well, this agitation effort, this culture war in Europe. So who's driving all the migrant flows, Danny, into Europe? Well, let me just start with Libya. Then let's look at Iraq. Then let's look at Syria. Then let's look at, well, of course, Palestine, but let's look at a few other conflicts. Let's look at Afghanistan. So NATO and Israel by proxy, being a major influencer of U.S. foreign policy, all the major migrant flows into Europe the last 30 years are a result, Yugoslavia, the Balkans, are a result of NATO interventions and also Israeli involvement. And I include Sudan in there as well.
Definitely Sudan.
And I will include the Horn of Africa in there as well.
Yeah. You have Somalia. Yep.
Somalia. I mean, let's just keep going. How far do we want to go? And so Israel's basically telling the far right in Europe, we're fighting your fight here. We're holding the gates of Vienna. That's what it is. That is the sales pitch that they give to Orban in Hungary and everywhere else. And meanwhile, Israel's doing everything humanly possible to drive migration into Europe.
Yep.
And then divide them along these new prescribed lines, which are, pro-Israel. You're either pro-Israel or you're pro-Muslim. You're either pro-Israel or you're pro-immigration. You see.
Yep.
And how they've very cleverly and skillfully done this. And there's been many academics who have written about this. There's been books written about this. There's plenty of articles, even in the Israeli press. So what I'm telling you is not like, esoteric knowledge, okay? But what I'm telling you has not made its way into the European political conversation yet in any meaningful way. And so people like Elon Musk and others are taking advantage of the ignorance of the Tommy Robinson crowds and the angry mobs that will, back Nigel Farage on a single political issue, which are boats,
Right.
A few thousand people coming on boats across the English Channel, and we'll basically try to ride in to power in the next general election on the basis of that single issue. When in fact, it's much more complex than that. It's much deeper than that. This has to do with geostrategic planning and strategy at the highest levels of institutions, investment banks, transnational corporations, and governments. And so if people really understood this, and then they would look at the immigration issue very differently. But that's what's shaping European politics right now. Right. That one issue.
I've always been of the opinion, Patrick, that what's going on in Gaza and West Asia, the war, that is, Israel is gearing up for round 2. U.S. is resupplying those air defense systems to go at it again, even as it is completely and utterly mired in Gaza, just made it a killing field. The reason why the United States is so keen on supporting Israel in a large respect is because, as you said, it is an asset. And no matter how unreal, we can look at this and say, wow, genocide, that is really difficult to swallow for a political class supposedly representing Americans, or even European political class supposedly representing Europeans. Really difficult to swallow that they'd be willing to accept genocide and even participate in it, and even lead it in many cases, in order to do what you said, which is to cut off China, cut off Russia, to turn West Asia, to turn the Caucasus, turn that whole region into essentially the stopgap where they shall not go, where Chinese infrastructure, Russia military, trade, Chinese trade especially, cannot go. But I think the path, the logical conclusion can only be made that, that's what it is all about. It's not working out so well, but that's the aim.
Yeah, the Zanzur corridor, I can't pronounce it, but what they're planning to do with Armenia basically the flipping of Armenian politics over the last couple of years. I'd never understood what was going on until now. Now I can see. So the U.S., Britain, and their allies are committed to this geostrategic policy to disrupt and to sabotage the Belt and Road Initiative, and they have various tools that at their disposal to do that, and to basically derail any efforts of any kind of a middle corridor, basically linking up Russia via Iran to the Indian Ocean, and also Iraq would play a big role in this as well. So just think of those, changing of the trade routes for a millennia, nearly. The trade routes have been a certain way, and in the last couple of hundred years, maritime trade dominated by the British and the Americans and some European countries. And so the global economy is built around that. So geopolitics has been built around that. Halford Mackinder's World Island is built around that. Zbigniew Brzezinski's policies are built around that, and so on and so forth. U.S. is still stuck in this. So are the British. So China's building, and Britain and the U.S. are blowing up. They're blowing things up. They're destroying things. They're sabotaging things. That is the only discernible policy I see in terms of a global vision, is that Asia, China specifically, but India and other countries are keen to build, and the West is keen to destroy. And this is where the clash is. And there is a big potential for conflict here. What's happening in Gaza, the most horrifying thing about it, and believe me, it's horrifying, but it's hard for me to sit and ruminate on this, the violence, the destruction, the gore, the killing, just the wanton use of military against densely populated civilian areas it's bad. It's really bad. The ethnic cleansing, the genocide of the native Palestinian population, it's just unspeakable. We've never seen anything like this in our lifetimes, ever in the modern era. But what's more frightening, that or the fact that nobody can step forward to stop it, that nobody can restrain Israel or the U.S. support for it, or the British support for it, and that people are talking their way around it like, oh, well, it's not. I had a conversation with somebody over the weekend at an event. I said they didn't know what my views were, but I opened the opening gambit. I said, is there a white genocide happening in Europe? Because you hear that punted around. There's a white genocide. The Nick Fuentes, a white genocide. Yep. Right. White genocide, and it'll be not sure. The right wing types. Yeah, there is a white genocide happening, and it'll be. Is there a genocide happening in Gaza? Not really. I don't want to use that word genocide. That's a bit harsh. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and that's not a great place, politically, intellectually, from a societal level. And there's a lot of people that believe things that simply are not true. Mm-hmm. And so, and their politics is being informed by that. They're preyed on by people like Elon Musk and the billionaire oligarchs that are just throwing money around to divide people. And it's almost as if they want to have a civil war and maybe World War III on the back end of that. That's what it seems like. At least those are the signals that are being sent. And so, I think in the West it's a really, really difficult. They're in a really, really difficult place, and the Israeli brand is damaged forever. It will never recover. It'll never recover. Israelis will move forward in history denying they're Israeli. They'll want to identify with some other nationality. This is going to happen. So they're very close to getting their final solution in Gaza, but in doing so, it's the ultimate Faustian pact. They lose legitimacy, and they will probably eventually lose their, Jewish state as a result. And this is just how history goes. But the question is, what kind of damage could be done in the interim while this process takes place? That's the frightening part. And who's going to stop it? who is there a nation, even one European nation, that could step forward and say, we're going to embargo Israel, who's with us, and do it publicly and challenge everybody on a moral level? Does that exist? You know, is it going to be a next U.S. president? Like, is, you know,
Right.
how is this going to happen? If it doesn't happen, I think we're in for some trouble, personally. And you know, I'm not a doomer, but I'm just reading the playing field, and I'm like looking for who's going to block and tackle here. There's nobody.
Yeah.
So I'm worried.